Hello everyone! Here's a review I was thinking of doing a couple months from now, but I ran into a technical difficulty with what I was going to talk about this week and had to come up with an alternative. So today we're going to take a look at 1956's Warning from Space. The Japanese title is Uchujin Tokyo ni Arawaru, or Spacemen Appear in Tokyo, which is not a very exciting name, so Warning from Space it is. Rumors swirl about UFOs being spotted over Tokyo, causing problems with brownouts and radio interference, and there are no fish in the bay. When large, starfish-like aliens begin to emerge from the water, people are terrified. But one alien assumes the form of a popular dancer in order to communicate with the people of Earth and warn them that they're on a collision course with another planet. I learned about this movie randomly while I was working on another review. It didn't have anything to do with the film I was preparing to discuss, but the search engine pushed it on me, believing it was relevant. I saw this promotional image, which was definitely intriguing, and then the IMDb score was so low, 4.7, that I thought, aha, this sounds promising. I approached this movie expecting it to be a hilarious good time. I was thinking, oh great, this will be a fun kaiju review right before Christmas. I was looking for silly monster costumes and clunky but sincere special effects. That's not exactly what I got. As it turns out, there are a couple laughable scenes in this, which are very funny, but it takes a long time to get there, and then that's it, because despite appearances, Warning from Space is not a giant rubber monster movie or a goofy alien movie. What it is an apocalyptic drama, which happens to include some goofy alien costumes. I was more than halfway through the movie when I figured that out, and then I had to entirely readjust my brain. But the roller coaster of reactions continued after the movie ended, and I began to do some research, because that's when I realized just how far off my expectations had been. This movie was released in Japan in 1956, but for some reason I had it in my head that it came out in 1966. For a movie like this to come out in the mid-60s in conjunction with things like Invasion of Astro Monster isn't that impressive. But 1956, that's different. That's just 2 years after Ishiro Honda's Gojira broke new ground, 1 year before The Mysterians came out, and 5 years before the British apocalyptic film The Day the Earth Caught Fire was released, which I mention because it has some similar elements, and this movie reminded me of it, and I was thinking as I watched it that the highly praised The Day the Earth Caught Fire may have been an influence, but it did not precede this film, The Boots on the Other Foot. I learned Warning from Space was released in January of '56 by Daiei, the same studio that made 1965's Gamera the Giant Monster and its sequels, which is another reason why I assumed that I was getting something akin to that. I also wasn't aware that this was the first Japanese science fiction film released in color, beating out Rodan, which Toho didn't release until December of that year. And the color looks, well, in some sequences it looks great. It's a little wobbly in others, and has kind of a 1930s 2 or 3 strip Technicolor appearance. But this film's climax would not be nearly as effective were it made in black and white. That image I saw that first caught my attention, it's a notorious work of false advertising. There are abnormally large starfish-shaped aliens with special powers, yes, and flying saucers too, but this is not a kaiju film. At no point do gigantic starfish go galumphing through Tokyo and knocking buildings down. Is that kind of disappointing? Yes, but only because I saw the promotional art first. And from watching 50-plus kaiju movies, it's kind of what I've come to expect. But the thing is, I don't believe Warning from Space was ever intended to be lumped in with those movies which followed it. It was directed by Koji Shima, a fairly prolific filmmaker who I gather dealt primarily with domestic themes and family-centric drama. I suspect that were he alive today, He might be startled to learn that this movie is what he's most known for, seeing as it's so unlike most of his other work. The screenplay was written by Hideo Oguni, the acclaimed screenwriter credited for his work on several Kurosawa films based on an idea by producer Gentaro Nakajima. As soon as I learned all this, the movie made more sense. The slower pace, the focus on characters, the lack of bombastic destruction sequences. While the film had initially struck me as surprisingly slow, even kind of boring, I realized in hindsight that what threw me off was that it didn't follow the usual formula. And it's no wonder! In 1956, the formula hadn't been set yet. The Godzilla series only consisted of 2 movies, and Daiei was years away from trying to follow in Godzilla's enormous footsteps with their giant, flying, rocket-powered space turtle. So, I was making comparisons based on wrong assumptions and misconceived notions. In short, I was being unfair. And then I remembered that 4.7 IMDb score, and I wondered how many other people had done the same thing. By the way, I think it's very important to note here that, as is my preference with any foreign film, I watched the original Japanese version with English subtitles, which is currently on Amazon Prime. It could be that everyone who gave it a terrible, lousy rating saw a different version that made a hack job of the original, in which case we're talking about 2 entirely different films. The truth is, while it's not a great film, it's not as bad as its reputation. It's just different. It's more a mystery than a horror or action movie. It has a relatively calm, quiet approach that takes its time with its material and devotes several scenes to characters trying to grasp the situation. Most of these characters are average people, scientific men who work at the observatory, and their families. The outlier is the famous dancer the aliens choose to use as an avatar. There is something odd about the dance numbers, probably because they're so flamboyantly American, not Japanese at all, and that just makes them feel a little bit off. Actress Toyomi Karita plays both performer Hikari Aozora and Ginko-san, her double, who's an alien in disguise. And you can be sure that I've just spent the last 5 minutes trying to get those names right. Still not sure that I nailed it. We just catch glimpses of the aliens when they make attempts to reveal themselves, and I give the movie credit for more or less concealing their appearance through the first act, photographing them from a distance or at an angle. But when we do finally get a good look, hoo boy! Hello! It's a giant squishy starfish standing at your back door, shuffling its feet. But wait! There's more! And I almost hate to spoil it because, let me tell you, after watching 26 sedate minutes of relatively serious movie, this surprise was rewarding. But I've got to talk about it. For an Act 1 finale, the film switches point of view to the alien mothership, and we get to observe a meeting of the alien beings from Pyra. If you're someone who watches old Japanese monster movies just for the laughs, this is going to be the highlight for you. The costumes are wonderfully bad. Why'd they go with starfish anyway? That's what I'd like to know. Because this is so awkward. The way they stand, the tiny feet sticking out with little booties, the antenna that I didn't even notice the first time around, the little arm flaps of approval. Gotta love the awkward way they pass the picture over, too. Overall, this film really doesn't play anything for laughs, but I do get a strong tongue-in-cheek vibe from this dialogue, where they're so indignant about the humans running away from them. I love the offended, "Do they think us ugly?" and the way they scoff at the human standard of beauty. And those voices! You know the song Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard by Paul Simon? You know that percussion sound that you hear at certain points in the song? That's what their voices sounded like to me. This part is comical, but you know, it's also interesting. While revealing that they have come to help, not to harm the human race, they also show benevolence, concern for each other's well-being. Theirs is an advanced civilization, believe it or not, and the main scientist, Starfish, takes upon itself the dangerous task of assuming human form and coming to Earth. It picks the dancer because, naturally, if it looks like a beautiful woman, people won't be afraid anymore. My mom was very impressed with the creepy transmutation sequence. I wonder if it was reminiscent of the transformation scene in Fritz Lang's Metropolis by design or by accident. Back on Earth, the humans have been lulled into a false sense of security by the aliens' apparent departure until a body is discovered in the lake. But it's not a body because she's actually not dead, and hey, she's the spitting image of the famous dancer who's still very much alive elsewhere in Japan. Then the mystery starts winding up again as she pretends to be human but doesn't quite pull it off, and the scientists recognize that there's something fishy about her. Get it? Fishy? When they become wise to her identity, that's when she reveals her message, which is a twofold warning. We must stop the development of nuclear weapons and atomic energy, a very day the Earth stood still message, and in just 90 days, a certain planet R from another solar system will collide with Earth. And that's really the end of Act 2. Unfortunately, I hate to admit this, but the first time I watched the movie, I was nodding off around here. There had just been so many quiet scenes of people talking or looking through telescopes that the movie wasn't holding my attention at the moment, and I started drifting off. And I was fighting it, but during the scene where she says who she is and why she's come to Earth, I was really not all there, and so I think I missed the crucial line, the "you have 90 days before you're going to be destroyed." So this next little period in the film was rough for me that first time around, because I would kind of open my eyes and be like, I'm awake, I know what's happening, but I knew I don't really know what's happening. I think I missed something. Watching it again, though, I realized there's a crucial shift here. From this point onward, a dire mood settles over the film. At first, people don't take the warning seriously, and who can blame them? But incredulity turns to curiosity, then apprehension, then full-blown panic as the planet is spotted rapidly approaching. At this point, composer Saitaro Omori's music becomes more prominent, helping build tension as officials wonder, what do we tell people? What do you do when there's nothing you can do? What happens in the last 20 minutes, though, is what made me sit up and take notice. As the sinister ball of fire that is Planet R gets closer, Warning from Space fully embraces its new existence as an apocalypse film, honing in on the eerie desolation of vacant streets in a deserted city. The existential threat feels far more serious than it usually does in tokusatsu films, especially ones geared toward children, which I don't believe this was. It helps that it keeps its focus on the terrified people huddled in underground shelters, watching and waiting as doomsday draws nigh. Radiation levels begin to climb, pavement starts to melt, animals collapse. Things get truly desperate as the world begins to fall apart and people wait to die. And the fact that this is the same movie that had those absurd scenes I talked about earlier just astonishes me. Now, I don't want to give away the whole thing here, but it's Christmas time and I'm not looking to depress people, so I will let you know that everything does turn out okay. It gets dark, but not that dark. So that final act took me by surprise in the best possible way, and for me, it redeemed the film. It also reminded me of another Japanese movie that I still haven't gotten to see, The Last War, or Sekai Daisenso, a nuclear apocalypse film that came out in 1961. I'm curious how that compares. It reminded me of several other movies too, all which came out later. I suspect Warning from Space's biggest problem is that it has been misclassified. I can't stress enough that it isn't like a Godzilla movie. It's barely a monster movie at all, and if you go into it expecting something like that, you're setting it up to fail. Granted, it's far from perfect. There are elements that could have been better that make me say, what were they thinking? It can feel like you're watching 5 different movies rolled into one, and that's tough. But even with all that, I think it deserves more attention and praise than it gets. As a people solving a space mystery movie, it's decent. As an end-of-the-world movie, it's pretty good. As a funny alien movie or a monster movie that makes you laugh, it doesn't really work, because outside of a couple scenes, it's not goofy enough. The thing is, it wasn't meant to be. And that's the other problem. Whether any sequence was intended to be funny or not, the film threatens to sabotage itself, undermining its ability to be taken seriously later on when it counts. If only certain elements had been handled differently, the eerie final act would be what people remembered most, and rightly so. And now I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the movie. If you've seen Warning from Space, what do you think of it? Do you think it's underrated and unfairly criticized? Or do you think it's a terrible movie and I'm crazy for saying anything positive about it? Go ahead and share your thoughts in the comments below, and stay tuned for another controversial review next week. Thanks for watching!